All right.
All right, good afternoon, good afternoon. Quick show of hands, how many people in the audience have done VR before? Let's get them up. We want more hands up. All right, all right. Let's do a quick introduction on each of our panelists. I'm going to ask Ryan to start. Please tell them who you are and what your company does.
Sure, I'm Ryan Pulliam. I'm the CMO and co-founder of Specular Theory, and we are an immersive content and technology company based in Los Angeles. We create everything in virtual reality and augmented reality across cinematic and entertainment and games, and recently v-commerce.
Great.
Hi, my name's John Wadelton. I'm CTO at Foundry. We're a software company. We make tools for the entertainment and design industries. You've probably seen some of our tools in action, or the results of those tools anyway. Our best tool, or most renowned tool, is called Nuke. It's used for compositing, which is kind of like Photoshop for movie pictures, and it's been used on many, many features that you would have seen. Stuff like Star Wars and Avatar and movies like that have used Nuke. We also have tools for doing design, particularly in ideation and creating designs for things like shoes and apparel, that kind of thing.
Great. So let's start. I'd love to get each of your opinions on where we are in the VR life cycle. How early are we? When do you see some major tipping points and inflection points happening? And what might be drivers and catalysts of that?
I'll go first then. Yeah, I think we're very much in the the whole innovators, the kind of curve that we're in. We're kind of at the early stages still, that's for sure. It's early days yet. A lot of people trying to innovate, a lot of people trying to learn how to tell stories in VR, and also how to create games in VR, because it is still different to the traditional media. And it's the same thing with hardware. We're on the start of that as well. We've got PlayStation VR out there, which is fantastic, and that's the biggest one, like over 1 million headsets sold, which is great. But other headsets as well are out there, not nearly as much. We're seeing things like you having to buy a big PC to run an Oculus or a Vive, so that's kind of a barrier to people right now. And we're seeing other things like headsets and mobile phones, Google putting a lot of cash in, and that sort of thing picking up as well. So I think there's a few barriers on the hardware side that we have to overcome, but they're slowly coming down, especially with Microsoft jumping on board, and I expect we will see something by Christmas on the Microsoft front. And as everyone knows, when Microsoft gets behind something, there is a big kind of tumble forward for things. So I think we're on the edge of things becoming more mainstream. Still not there quite yet, but it's kind of on the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we're still in the early days. I think we're talking anywhere from probably 7 to 9 million headsets out there. Probably, if you're talking about gaming specifically, we have at least a few 100,000, I think, in the ecosystem that are active users. In the recent reports, I know at least from up until last year, is that all of the early adopters are happy customers, and they're all have an approval rating over, I think, 75% being happy with their purchases. They're spending money. I think the average spend was about $160 on PC VR software. So while, despite what you may kind of read or hear, I'm incredibly excited about it, and I think location-based, to kind of answer your question, is going to be a great catalyst for really driving sort of these premium, higher-end experiences using your software, of course. And it'll still a little more time to go, probably another year or so, I think, to get a little more traction. But
So Ryan, since you brought up location-based, what's the implication of that trend? Some people have suggested maybe the in-home basement living room purchases that we referenced earlier aren't matriculating as much. Maybe going to an arcade, going to a cafe, going to some other public environment might be the way to kind of move the market into greater adoption. If you do go to that experience as a consumer, what will you likely encounter? What should you expect?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think it is this huge opportunity, and at the same time, I think it's a huge missed opportunity right now. I think a lot of the games that you're currently seeing in the mix, there's not a lot of diversity, to be honest. A lot of it is first-person shooters and zombie games, not that there's anything wrong with that. But I do think that just as a market, we should really be encouraging kind of more mainstream content, because it doesn't just have to be gamers and controllers like this. And I think when you think about all the games like this, they're really designed for the home market. And so a lot of the games that we're seeing right now in VR are really the home-based version of the game that is now set in a location. So it's not really optimizing for the location. So in my opinion, I think every location should have green screen and excitement, and it should be fun to spectate or play, and it should really involve kind of locomotion and moving around. And but I think there are incredible venues. I mean, China, it's definitely exploding. A lot of people claim if they're mom and pop shops kind of running an arcade, but there's obviously some big push with AMC and with companies like Dreamscape and The Void and the deals they're doing with the movie theaters and shopping malls. So I think that's going to be a really great opportunity as long as we can curate the content well.
Yeah, I'd echo that as well. Like, I think location-based is very exciting, and it actually overcomes a lot of the barriers which I described before. This whole notion of having at home, having to buy a PC, having to set it up, that kind of goes away with location-based, because you go to a place where all of the hardware is already set up, it's all optimally working, you don't have to be an early adopter to understand how to set it up, you kind of get led through it. And the other thing that's really exciting as well is that the first experience in VR can be a bit disorientating. You kind of need a chaperone, someone to help you through it, and location-based can really help with that as well. You have experienced people there. If you're feeling a bit apprehensive, they will take you through it, explain how it works, and that really makes you experience something in a nice way. And I also think for the industry, it's really great to have that first VR experience that the consumer gets to be a really top-end, high-grade experience, so that they fall in love with it, want to take it home later, and then hopefully that leads into them wanting to buy a PC or the headsets at home in the future.
So, John, this one's for you. The developers that are taking advantage of your software solutions, tools, and stack, are they more VR-centric developers? Are you seeing people that come from VFX and other traditional industries trying to jump and abandon their prior lives and go all in on VR? Like, what's the state of the developer mindset as it pertains to VR right now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually, and it's super exciting, to be honest, VR for the visual effects community, and I think for gamers as well, hopefully, because it's this kind of melding of two different worlds together, which we haven't seen for a long time. So it's kind of that traditional storytelling in the visual effects world and movies and so on, and this game engine, realistic, real-time engines kind of melding together. And I think that, you could say, from the gaming perspective, I can just do an open world. We've been doing that for years. We can just translate that into VR. It's from first person. I can just translate it into VR. But I don't think it's that simple. There's kind of this kind of intersection of the two. Where's that sweet spot between visual effects or traditional story making and gaming that's sort of in the middle? So an example would be, like, in my experience, I go to a lot of studios who are making a lot of content, and in my previous life, I would go in, I would see people using Nuke, our compositing tool. I would see people creating 3D content inside Maya or something like that. And these days, I go into the same studios and I see the same people, but I also see a row of Unreal Engine developers or Unity developers sort of in that same environment. And I think it's the same in the gaming kind of world, like these visual effects storytellers actually going from being a visual effects supervisor to a film to now working in, I know guys now at Riot Games, for instance, who was formerly a part of Disney. So that kind of mixing is really happening, and I think it's really exciting for both sides.
Ryan, what do you think? You're a co-founder of a VR startup. Do you think VR native founders who don't come from film, television, VFX, gaming, and other industries like that have an advantage in this new world order? Or do you think a hybrid kind of model of skills is the best way to kind of brew that founding team?
I mean, it definitely takes some skill sets and expertise from the traditional mediums. I mean, I'm very spoiled because my business partner and the founder, Morris May, does come from Hollywood, and he's a visual effects expert. So he's kind of running all the technical content creation side of things. But I will say a lot of times I think there's been a misconception about whether or not Hollywood directors or involving people from the big game companies are necessarily going to make a great VR. And while they can do that, the reality is the true creators that have really been doing this first generation, that we've spent all of our hours failing and succeeding and failing again and succeeding. And most of, I think, the leading VR companies right now, we're all using our kind of custom-built tools to sort of answer a lot of these questions. And so I think there is a lot to be said for kind of these first generation VR content creators. I think it's going to be exciting to see what comes of it, especially from the younger younger kids, I guess. But this is all we do. So when you talk about trying to mitigate risk, I mean, we don't get paid to fail. So I think there's definitely a value add, and I think it's just something, whether or not if you have started the VR company or you are working in a traditional medium, I think the biggest lesson or the biggest thing I can encourage you to do is just really think natively about the space. So it really should just be some kind of story, or it has to be a purpose as to like why you're wearing this headset, because so many people already have reservations about wearing it in the first place. So you really got to give them that reason. And I think to really think through that, you do kind of have to think past and break through some of the barriers that you may be used to in other formats and storytelling. But
that's so true.
How would you rate or comment on the major HMD platforms in terms of their support for game developers and content creators in VR? What would you like to see them do more of? What would you like to see them do less of?
It's probably more a question for you than me.
I personally would like to see them supporting indie studios and developers more. I mean, obviously I'm a little biased to that, but I do think there's been a lot of funds raised and sort of in question of supporting the ecosystem, and you're seeing a lot of kind of the platforms going directly to big IPs and brands. And as a marketer, I 100%, I understand, and you want to capitalize on that audience, certainly, but it would be nice, I think, to have a little more support just for the original and indie content. Particularly, I think when you're looking at the locations, you're going to find a lot of it is sort of marketing or movie and promotional tie-ins, where I think there's just room for both. I think it's great to have both and kind of have more diversity, but I have to also give them a huge round of applause for even getting us to this point and providing this opportunity. And it's great to see so many big companies really support this medium and get behind it.
John, do you have any visibility of the developers using your software platforms? What HMD platforms ultimately they're publishing to or deploying to? You mentioned Sony early on. Any kind of suggestions if I'm going to build my first experience, what platform I should target?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Sony's got the most amount of headsets out there, and then the other two are kind of even in the mix. And we see content creators creating experiences targeting all of the platforms. But what we've found, especially with people not making non-gaming content, which is kind of experience-driven, that because of the amount of headsets, they also make sure that they make a 360 video of the same content or a traditional timeline of the content as well, so they can get a lot of eyeballs on it. So that there might be a teaser that will be on YouTube or something, but then that will drive people to the headset because you can get millions of views on YouTube. If that makes sense. So it's important to have cross kind of format.
Ryan, you alluded to earlier, we have plenty of first-person shooter games out there. What genres or game types or experience types would you like to see more of, and same from your perspective, John?
I mean, I think for me, it's, I think in order to create content for the masses and get this mainstream, I mean, that's exactly what you need to do, is create content for the masses. So I think, there's also a responsibility on creators to sort of expand the market. I mean, particularly with locations, and if you're dealing with shopping malls or VR arcades, I mean, these are venues and centers that you're going to get, moms and dads and kids and babysitters and who else, kind of running through the center. And I think there's just so many cool, amazing things you can do in VR that doesn't necessarily involve having a gun and shooting something. And I mean, by all means, I do have fun playing these games. I don't want to bash this entirely. I just think in addition to that, it would be great to see more kind of onboarding content. I mean, you look at the success of Tilt Brush and the Blue and things like that, but we haven't seen anything new really in the last couple of years. So that's kind of one of the problems that we're working on, at Specular Theory right now. We have a new game that we're going to release, and part of the thought process behind that was to really create something that's a lot more intuitive and natural for people to grab onto, that doesn't involve any tutorials or instructions, that is for all ages, endless levels and things like that.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that part of what I've seen by reading a lot of reports and stuff about the future of VR and the future of AR is there's a huge portion of VR and AR that's actually kind of industry driven, as in product visualization and training and that kind of thing, which is just kind of an immediate ROI for it. And I just think it's interesting that as game developers, the technology behind all of that stuff, all of VR and AR, is all done by game engines, right? And all the same sort of skills get applied. So there's a tremendous opportunity for people who are doing games to diversify into kind of doing these other kind of areas for industry, because those numbers are going to be huge. Like I've seen reports that say within 3 years it'll outstrip games by far as the biggest use case for VR, that kind of industrial kind of use cases. So I think that's interesting. Yeah.
John, for you, where would I go to learn how to use your software, right? If I want to get into this business, start leveraging some of your tools, how do I train for that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's a few different types of VR, right? So if you're going to do the sort of VR that our tools work on, which is like 360 video or immersive video, then you can go to the Foundry website, and there's lots of information about using Nuke, using Kara, our 3D VR tools. Then I would obviously look at the tutorials on Unity Unreal. They're really good tutorials for how to create this immersive content, both for AR and VR, available at those sites. And I think that's a really great starting point to kind of start to learn. That kind of learned how to do the technical abilities anyway. Then I would just look at great content. You know, try and find the best content out there. And there are kind of lists that rate people.
You have to try a lot.
Yeah, you have to try a lot. I mean, there was a VR Awards in London a couple of weeks ago that kind of announced some great bits of content in lots of different fields. I would go and try and look as much content as you can because it's how you explained before, some content is just translating something that was been in a screen or in a game to VR, and it doesn't work that. You have to take it as its own medium that's new and take advantage of that medium and do it in a special way. Because it is a big barrier putting that thing on your head, and it needs to be great to be able to keep you in there.
And I will say that even when people, despite what you may hear, when the experience is great, no one complains about the headset.
Yeah,
and when
exactly,
the story is great, no one talks about the pixels. So it's really finding, I think, that purpose as to why you're there. And like you said, like we're not just trying to optimize for a headset. It's not like a secondary third screen. It's you're creating something new. I mean, it really is a new experience and a new memory. So just really think about how you want to storytell and thinking of it that way.
I would add one more thing to that content stuff. Like the tilt brush that you brought up before is really interesting. I've talked to some people that have stayed 8 hours in tilt brush. They just get in, they just love it, right?
Yeah, and it's fun because you're moving your whole body around.
And that's bodies around and you're doing different things. And I think that's super exciting because it's a new, like making 3D, as you probably know as game developers, is really hard. Really hard. And VR is that first time, especially, that you can step into the 3D world and actually create things in 3D with your hands. And I wish there were game developers or somebody who would make more tools that leverage that. And we're working on it ourselves, but I think more of those is going to be really exciting because it hopefully makes it easier to create all this stuff.
Last question. If you're successful in developing a VR experience, how the heck do you get the word out on it? How do you market it? How do you get as many people to kind of consume it, interact with it as possible? Any best practice suggestions?
Well, I guess you're going to put it on Steam and do the kind of things that I described before, like having videos on YouTube. And if it's an experience, try and do an editorial version of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just do it and get it out there. And I encourage to develop on every platform. Conferences like this are great. Film festivals have been really great. Just trying to get, I think, people on the ground and physically trying it from every aspect. So you're going to get the most diversity there.
Great. Thank you both. Please join me in giving a round of applause for Ryan and John. Thank you very much.